Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Nextopia, site search that increases sales. Visit nextopia.com/podcast to learn more. Welcome to eCommerce Conversations, a weekly podcast focusing on e-commerce topics featuring interviews with prominent people in the e-commerce space.
Welcome to eCommerce Conversations by Practical E-Commerce. I'm Kerry Murdock. The U.S. Virgin Islands are located roughly 90 miles east of Puerto Rico in the Caribbean Sea. The islands are known for their white sand beaches and clear blue water. But a new Virgin Islands-based economic initiative wants e-businesses to know there's significant tax advantages to doing business there. This new initiative partners the University of the Virgin Islands with private technology providers. It's called eCommerce Island, and its chief marketing officer is Steve Rohrlick, who joins us today. Well, Steve, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome, Kerry.
Steve, the U.S. Virgin Islands has massive internet and broadband infrastructure, interestingly enough. Tell us why that is.
Well, it was actually just a pure coincidence or lucky bounce. Many years ago, Global Crossing laid billions of dollars of undersea fiber optic cables under the oceans, connecting the United States to Latin America, South America, Europe, and Asia. And these cable assets need to be checked periodically from a landmass. And because the Global Crossing network contains military and governmental communications, the company needed to make sure that these stations that are actually located on land had to be on U.S. territory. And it just so happens that the island of St. Croix, which is one of the U.S. Virgin Islands, happens to be the most southeasterly place in the United States. So that's where they put their cable stations, which have access to all of their fiber optic cables. And so it ends up that the island of St. Croix has the second largest concentration of bandwidth, second only to New York City.
I know, Steve, you're involved with an initiative that takes advantage of that infrastructure. It's a public-private partnership in the Virgin Islands that can really help software and e-commerce companies that are involved with that. Could you explain this initiative to us?
Sure, absolutely, Kerry. The U.S. Virgin Islands is part of the United States. We're not a state, we're a territory, and because of a very unique circumstance, we do not pay taxes in the U.S. Virgin Islands to the IRS. Instead, we pay taxes to the Virgin Island Revenue Bureau, and this has been something that's been in place for about a half a century. The benefit of the tax situation in the U.S. Virgin Islands is because the Virgin Island government collects and therefore spends the money that it collects in the Virgin Islands, it has the control over waiver of any or all of those taxes. And because we are a disenfranchised territory with a low per capita income, we have what are some really incredible tax opportunities for companies that decide to locate in the Virgin Islands. And even though the tax code on its face is a mirror tax code of the U.S., the Virgin Island government has an economic development program, which I'm affiliated with the University of the Virgin Islands, whereby we can waive 90% of federal income tax for companies that locate their servers and operations in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
And what's that initiative called?
It's called the University of the Virgin Islands Research and Technology Park.
And for qualifying businesses that locate there, those businesses can save 90% on their federal tax liability.
That's right. So say a typical company that is profitable and is paying, let's say, 35 or 40% in taxes to the IRS. If they were doing those same operations from the U.S. Virgin Islands instead of the United States mainland, they would then be paying between 3.5% and 4% tax on their profit.
So what type of businesses qualify for this?
Well, the best fits, Kerry, are companies that are purely digital. The IRS gave some examples in 2008 of the type of businesses that would qualify, and the two examples that they set out in those regulations, one is software as service, so any type of company where the user is basically logging in and those servers are located in the Virgin Islands would qualify. And the other was actually the purchase of software, whereby the terms and conditions of the transfer say that title for the software passes in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So in both of those examples, the IRS would look at those transactions as Virgin Island transactions, and then the Virgin Islands tax law would take over, which allows qualifying tenants to receive the aforementioned benefits. So some of the other types of companies that would fit into those examples would be research reports. Anyone who might sell research reports, digital photographs, music, ringtones, online databases, online dating, just to give you an example of some that would really fit in the sweet spot.
E-books, I would guess.
Exactly.
Does the business have to physically locate there? The example that you and I spoke about earlier, Steve, say the business is located in Kansas. Do they have to pack up and move to the Virgin Islands to take advantage of this?
No, they don't. What they need to do is form a new entity that's incorporated in the Virgin Islands, and then make sure that the aforementioned components of their business, i.e. software as service or actual something that's being served from the servers in the Virgin Islands, as long as those servers and the intellectual property are residing in the Virgin Islands, that would satisfy the IRS's regulations. Now, I also need to caution that every business is different. So if there are certain adjunct services that are supporting the delivery of those digital services, then you have to look on a case-by-case basis in order to determine which personnel or which type of people might also have to be located in the Virgin Islands.
For listeners that think they may qualify or that may be interested in exploring more, how can they know if they fit and what their total savings will be? I know you said perhaps the operating costs are slightly higher down there in certain instances, but the federal tax liability is dramatically lower. So what's the next step for an interested business? Well,
the next step is we've created a website that answers, or at least attempts to answer, most of the questions, and that's at www.ecommerceisland.com. I think what you pointed out, just to give people an idea, is first of all, this really only makes sense for profitable companies. If you're not profitable, then the tax savings really doesn't do you any good. And also, if you've just recently become profitable and still have net operating losses to use up, it's also probably not a fit. But for any company that is profitable and paying taxes in the U.S., I think it really makes sense for them to take a look and see if they fit. On the eCommerce Island site, there's a bunch of FAQs and background information. And then, of course, there's an opportunity for them to email or call us, and we help work them through the process in order to determine if they're a fit or not.
Okay. This has been interesting. Anything else on your mind today for our listeners? Mainly e-commerce businesses, smaller e-commerce businesses. We have developers that listen to this.
Well, I think that pretty much if you're a pontificator or even a prognosticator of what's likely to happen in the United States over the next few years, you can pretty much rest assured that if you're a profitable company, you're going to be under a higher level of taxation. And so I think the opportunity that we have in the U.S. Virgin Islands to reduce your taxation is sort of a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders. And the great news is we are still in the United States, so you're under the U.S. flag with FDIC insurance. If any IP needs to be adjudicated, it's adjudicated in Philadelphia. And, of course, we have the massive amounts of bandwidth, so it's really something that I would suggest to any profitable company to help them get an advantage over their competitor, something they should really explore and take a look at.
Well, the site again is eCommerceisland.com. There's no hyphens in that, just eCommerceisland.com. And Steve Rohrlick, the Chief Marketing Officer of eCommerce Island, we want to thank you for your time today, sir.
You're welcome, Kerry.
That's all the time we have for this week's e-commerce conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Please tune in next week for another new episode.